Amen. Amen. Thank you, Mark. Good morning, church. Man, it's so good to see you here this morning. And let me just go ahead and say to those of you that are across the way watching in our overflow room, thank you for your patience in that. And we're glad that you're here as well. If you're joining us online, also welcome. We're glad that you're here. I do want to say this up top. I was just thinking about the song that we just sang. And the Lord just really spoke to my heart during that song because I think about myself as a father, as a dad. And on a regular basis, we'll have our kids out or I'll take the kids out in the yard and they play. And inevitably, someone gets hurt or injured or a fight breaks out or, a toy gets taken from someone else or whatever it may be. So there's injuries to mend and there's feelings to be mended and things like that. And I think of myself as an earthly father as not really being perfect in that. I mean, I try my best in all that. But maybe someone today needs to hear this. It doesn't matter where you are right now in your life. It doesn't matter what quote unquote injuries that you've experienced in this life. There is a Father that you can come to again and again and again. And I mean, I think as an earthly dad, if my kids come to me with the same thing over and over again, I don't eventually go, "You've come before, leave me alone." Right? That'd be pretty cold. And can I just tell you, that's an imperfect dad. We have a perfect Father who again and again and again welcomes you into His arms and into His grace and into His mercy. And maybe you need to hear that today, that you can run back to God no matter where you're at and that He will welcome you in. And so I hope that you'll do just that. I want to say up top that today, our time together today and the things that I'm going to share are going to be kind of different than our normal message time. If you're new to Second, maybe you're a first-time guest today, maybe you've been worshiping with us online, maybe you've joined even in the past year. But one of the things that we've tried to do over the years here at Second is we've tried to take at least one Sunday out of the year and have a family talk. In other words, just kind of talk as a family and celebrate as a family. And what I mean by that is if you attend Second, or maybe you're a member here, or whatever it may be, maybe even online, that you're still a member here at Second, and you're part of the family. And so today's one of those times that we're going to just kind of have a talk together as a family. If you're not a member, if you're a guest today, don't tune me out, because I really think the things that I'm going to share today ought to, number one, interest you. Number two, it might help push you over the line that this might need to be the place that you become a part of and part of the team here and part of the family here. One of the things you may or may not be aware of is that every week on Tuesday, we gather all of our staff together on campus, everyone, support staff, ministry staff, everyone, and we all gather in a room together for a staff meeting. And at the very beginning of that staff meeting, we spend time in prayer together. So we share personal prayer needs with one another, and then we also talk about prayer needs that have been shared with us that are going on in the church. And we spend time in prayer together over those needs. But then the second thing that we do is very purposeful. And the second thing that we do every week is that we spend time celebrating or sharing praises that we've experienced in the past week or so. Now, there's multiple reasons for why I encourage the staff to celebrate each week. First of all, it reminds us every week that we are seeing the movement of God. No matter how small, we see God is at work in our ministry here at Second. Secondly, I think the reasons it's important is that our staff is involved in many different facets of ministry up here at the church. And so it's good to hear what's going on in other ministries that, for instance, right now, there is ministry taking place across the hall with our students and with our kids. We're not over there, but we'll get to hear what's been going on and what's been taking place. In fact, just this past week, just this past Tuesday in staff meeting, I heard three different things shared. There were other things, but three things that just stuck out at me. One of our children's pastors shared how she was talking with one of the volunteers that serve every Sunday. And he was sharing how another church member had encouraged him to come and volunteer in the kids area. And then that guy kind of moved on and this guy stayed. Well, then he invited someone to come and be a part of serving. And that guy came in, and then he and his family actually moved off. And the cool part of the testimony is this guy had never been really plugged into a church, but he started serving here in our kids area. Now he's involved in a whole nother church, and like he's like even teaching from time to time at the church that they're at, which I thought, you know what, it all began with that first volunteer encouraging someone to come and volunteer. Also, you've kind of heard it, but this weekend is our student conference. Well, what's interesting is 2 weeks ago in staff meeting, one of the prayer requests from Brandon was, hey, we only have 35 students signed up for student conference. Well, this Tuesday, Brandon said, stop praying. We have 90-something kids signed up for student conference now, and they're adding daily. And it was just cool to see that. And can I just real quickly deviate? Because this is very important to me. If you're a parent of a student, take time today to listen to your kids' stories. Take time to hear them talk about what God taught them, because I promise you he did. I promise you they had at least one experience this weekend that has kind of rocked their spiritual world. And they need to have a safe place to share that and someone celebrate that with them. And if you're a parent or you're a brother or a sister or an aunt or an uncle or a grandma or grandpa, celebrate that with them, okay? And then a third story that was shared this past week in staff meeting was one of our secretaries actually sat in on a baptism meeting that was being had up here at the church. And the young lady had come to talk to someone about being baptized, and the staff member shared as the conversation went along, there was a realization that this young lady had never really received Christ as her Savior. But as a part of that meeting, she prayed to receive Christ, and now she's going to be baptized on the 21st of this month. And that's just kind of a cool story that these different staff members have shared. And so it's good to celebrate wins. It's good to be reminded that God is at work, because if we don't pay attention, oftentimes we miss out, but oftentimes we don't take the time to praise God for what he is doing around us. And so we're going to do that today. Typically every year around this day, I think there's a football game that's supposed to happen today or something like that. I don't know. 2 teams, I could care less. The best thing about today is that I am given permission from our society to eat what I shouldn't eat in quantities that I should not eat. And I plan to do just that this afternoon at my house. But typically around Super Bowl Sunday is when I normally take time to have these talks, to celebrate and maybe even share vision. But today, we're just going to celebrate. And I don't think you're going to be disappointed. So hang on. I'm going to share a lot of information. I wish I could give you every little detail of every one of these stories, but we don't have the time. When I'm talking, they're going to throw some pictures up on the screen. I'm not even going to acknowledge them. At least I think they did in the last service. Did they? Okay. See, I can't see them because I'm not looking at the screens. You'll see pictures of some of the stuff. But just hang on for the ride. If you want to celebrate while I'm celebrating, feel free to do that. As you know, it was almost a year ago that we entered into a time of ministry that none of us could have ever dreamed would be a reality in our lives or in our lifetime. When we started getting wind of COVID and the potential of lockdowns and shutdowns, I am very grateful for our worship arts team, which is led by Jack. They really sprang into action and they said, hey, if we're going to be doing services online, we need some equipment. And so they immediately went online and began ordering equipment that we would need. I guess we could have done it. Someone could have stood here with an iPhone and done Facebook Live, but that would have been kind of cheesy. But they ordered all this equipment, and in 1 week's time, they ordered the equipment came in, they installed the equipment, they learned how the equipment even worked, and that following Sunday, we did our first service online live for the very first time that we had never, ever done in the history of our church. And I just say, yeah, way to go, team. Way to go, team. I mean, they did a phenomenal job. And, we went, as a church, we went from 0 online people to, in 1 week, over 1,000 people were watching us online. Now, I promise you, it didn't go to my head. Some of y'all were forced into doing that. But we're glad that you did that. We tried different kind of things as we were doing that. The going live was a very difficult thing, and so I want to go ahead and make a confession now. We've never confessed this publicly, but I want to get this off my chest. There were several weeks that we came up here, and our worship team sang to an empty worship center, and I or Jeremy or Mark preached to an empty worship center, and we recorded it, and we played it like it was live. I know. Now you feel like, what's real anymore, right? But we did that because we felt like it was an easier thing, and we could actually, transitions and things could be better. And let me just tell you, our teams, because we had volunteers on the singing and worship team, they would get off work and we would come up here in the evenings and spend hours up here making sure that we could have a worship service that when you were sitting at home, you could engage and you could feel as though you were still part of something that was good and beneficial in your spiritual life. The online audience has been fascinating to me. Even today, with people being in person, we still have 600 to 800 logins. Now, some people goes, what does that mean? I really don't know, except that at least one computer is looking at our service, and it could be multiple people looking at that one computer. We figure 2.5, but we go back and say, well, we have either 600 to 800 logins. Not like if you counted it at my house, there's like a ton of people watching it in my house. But when we were in COVID, the big part of lockdown. But, we have people who have been watching online. You're listening to me right now, and you're probably shaking your head. Their actual first engagement with our church was online. In fact, there's people who have been part of our church for almost a year now that have never stepped foot in this building. Some don't even live in this community. They live in other parts of the United States, and I have some friends overseas that log in and watch our services online, and it's just kind of exciting to see that. Some of our online folks have joined small groups virtually, and they don't even live here. And so it's neat to see how God has used that venue and that tool in such an amazing way. At the same time, our worship arts team started doing other things that were not normal in their schedule, like doing daily devotional videos. And I know daily devotionals ended last month, and we're working on that again for those of you that go, you're being lazy. No, we're not. It's a lot of time, and we haven't been on that recently, but we're going to get back on it. They started producing videos and ministry opportunities for our kids' ministry and our student ministry, things that they had never done before. And so I just want to give a big shout out of thanks to all of our folks who help us with the services. From our band to our singers to the lighting and the screens, people on the cameras. And one thing you probably didn't even know, but we actually have someone right now sitting in the other building in a little office by themselves. We're hoping that they're still awake right now at this moment, but they are working on the feed that is going live to make sure the sound is right, because you can't really mix that sound along with all the speakers in the same room. And that's been going on, and no one knows. That person's been back there in their little closet week after week, and we let them out for donuts and things like that. But, I could go on and on and on. There's a lot of things that team has done that we would have never been able to do this past year without them being involved in that. Let me move on to small groups. Of course, it's pretty obvious. You've heard us say, and you heard it just a moment ago, we believe life change happens best in small groups. I love this. I love this. I love the fact that we're able to gather together and worship together. I believe in this. But I also believe that you can come in here and you can get lost. You can come in here and you can experience worship and walk out and never build relationships. That's why we want you involved in a group. Well, it used to be that all of our small groups were done in person. People met in homes, or people came up here to the campus and they met in rooms at different times of the week and even some evenings. And so small groups were mainly a face-to-face ministry, but overnight that got shut down. But it was really a blessing to see Jim Herndon and his team of folks, volunteers, ramp up the online tools to be able to continue with small groups. Just real quick, who had ever heard of Zoom before COVID? Raise your hand. 5 or 6 people. But the rest of us now, we're like, Zoom, all right? And then there's all these other online tools like Zoom that we've used. And, I'm thankful for Jim's leadership, because years ago, he encouraged us to get involved with this ministry called Right Now Media, which you can get a free account through our church with Right Now Media. But we were able to offer for small groups doing Zoom meetings, the really good content and spiritual content that they could use even from that place. And it's just cool to see how that's worked. And I could tell you story after story after story of different small groups that have ministered to one another in very tragic situations like the loss of a loved one. They've celebrated birthdays together, socially distant. They've done all kinds of things as small groups, and they have continued to do that even in the midst of this socially distant time. But I want to give a particular just mention of a small group. I want to be nice. It's a older group of ladies, and most of them they're not comfortable coming to in-person worship. There's a few of them, but most of them still continue, and they're probably watching right now and shaking their fist at me for calling them older, but they watch online at home. Hey, ladies. And they all watch the service at maybe in the first or second, but then they take a break and they come back together, all these older ladies, and they do their small group online every Sunday at 1 o'clock. And I didn't even mention this in the first service, but I'm going to take a second. And the only reason that was possible is one of our volunteers, Mark Mayfield, went to all of them individually and helped them learn how to get into Zoom and got their computers up to date and all that kind of stuff so they could do it. And so every Sunday, this group of ladies gets together and they keep their community together. And so a big shout out to Kathy Shelby and her small group. Waving at you ladies right now. And speaking of ladies in small group, this past year, our women's ministry, this past summer actually, just the most recent story I could share with you, our women's ministry had a ladies' Bible study online over the book of Esther. And they started talking it up and encouraging ladies to join. And we had, over the summertime, 150 ladies in small groups together, not all in the same small group, but in small groups together, studying the book of Esther together. And that's just a way to go moment. That's an amazing thing. And speaking of our ladies' ministry, they've done a phenomenal job in the midst of this. All you ladies know, there's something about ladies, they like to get together, right? Y'all can't even go to the bathroom by yourselves. You have to go in groups. And so ladies like to get together and hang out together, and all of a sudden, overnight, that got changed. I think one of the most difficult decisions we made early on in this COVID stuff was canceling the ladies' retreat. That was a big deal. And there was a lot of agonizing moments over that. But our ladies' ministry leaders, who are all volunteers, started working diligently, and they put together a quote-unquote online ladies retreat, a ladies experience that was all done virtually, and it was such a phenomenal job with a lot of interesting things and Bible studies and testimonies and cooking classes and all kinds of stuff, and it was just a great deal. They've done other virtual events for the ladies during this time that they normally would have done in person, but they've done it over and over again. The most recent being just a few weeks ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago, they had a ladies' night of worship. And they did a live event here at the church, which 120, 130 ladies came to, and then there were many more that joined online and watched that same service. And so I just want to publicly say, you may not know this lady, but her name is Raquel Schaus. And Raquel Schaus and her team of ladies that run our women's ministry have done a phenomenal job this past year in leading ladies in their walk with Christ. Yeah, that's fine. One more real quick that's important a second that still involves Jim Herndon, and which I know is kind of funny. Jim Herndon's over the ladies ministry. Big Jim. Anyway, we had to have someone that scared him a little bit. But Jim handles our First Impressions ministry. And of course, when we weren't having services here, you don't need first impressions. But I want to say, when we decided to start back having in-person worship, we had a few, not a ton, because we know people were nervous, but we had a few volunteers that just really stepped it up. And they came and they started volunteering again, being greeters at the door and things like that. But their job changed dramatically because they were not only greeters at the door or helping people find seats in here, they also became the sanitizers of the doors and the sanitizers of the seats in the rooms. And they started learning cleaning protocols. And many of our greeters just stepped up, and they would stay for one service and then stay for the next service because we just didn't have a ton, but they made it work. And you know, they were faithful week in and week out, even when we were shorthanded. And I just say, way to go to them. In fact, there's one guy, his name's Eric. I think he was here earlier. He may still be here. But Eric and his family joined our church during COVID. They came to a new members class during COVID, joined our church, and the next Sunday, they were both serving as greeters here and have not missed a lick, except when they both got COVID. But that's another story. They didn't get it up here, all right? They didn't. But let me move forward with our student ministry and children's ministries. If I was just honest with you, probably the most tears that were shed in ministry over this past year were over our student ministry and kids ministries. Because those ministries thrive on face-to-face. I mean, really. And, every bit of that ministry is about hands-on and seeing kids and being with kids and teaching them in little groups. And all that came to a halt. In fact, I'll never forget when we first started in-person worship, some parents had brought their kids to church, and Ruth and Elisa were greeting out in the front, and I saw the kids with masks on, eyes light up, and the signs out there said smile and wave, and the little kids were like, but I really want a hug, because that's what they were used to. And the following Tuesday after those times, we would shed tears of just knowing that they were here, but knowing that ministry was so different. But Ruth, let me talk about Ruth and Elisa. They have just done a bang-up job this past year with our kids' ministry. And if you don't have a kid, you haven't seen these things. And so I want to just celebrate with them. They went from 0 online services, 0. They never did an online service, to they started doing their Sunday morning worship experience and their Wednesday night stuff live on Facebook. I mean, they were grabbing equipment from everywhere and rigging stuff up and making it work to the best of their ability. Right after we went into COVID was Easter, and they typically do a big Easter egg extravaganza, but they couldn't do it. So they did a deal called Easter Jam. If you didn't have kids and you didn't see Easter Jam, you missed probably one of the most entertaining times, because there was a guy, he's sitting over here, Chuck Russell, who he and his wife volunteer in our kids area, and Chuck Russell took eating Easter Peeps and drinking Dr. Pepper to a whole new level. I mean, I never saw a guy shove so many Easter Peeps in his mouth and swallow Dr. Pepper. I'm surprised he didn't have to have his stomach pumped at the end of that recording. Ruth and them had Kids Club, which is our Sunday night deal on Zoom. They did Kids Cup celebration in the parking lot. They did summer bash, some little bit of live stuff, but they did summer bash in a box. They followed that with Summer Bash Prize Patrol, where kids who did things, they would show up at their house and give them prizes. They did birthday parades, drive-by visits, pop-up picnics in the parks. They still had serve days and had families go to the Houston Food Bank. They did pop-up water balloon fights, and they showed up at my house and lost miserably to me and my boys. They delivered treats to the volunteers and had front yard visits. They did socially distant events, online family dance party, and family scavenger hunts, weekly Zoom parties for different grades in the summer to help just stay focused with kids and leaders. And a couple of months of Sunday, they would always give out bags to families so they could follow along at home with what was going on. Another big one they did this year, we normally do trunk or treat, where people are walking all over the place. But this year it was a drive-through. They had 25 trunks that people handed out candy, and we gave out over 20,000 pieces of candy that night to cars that came through. Talk about a sugar rush. I mean, that was amazing. But one that really, for me, it impacted me and my family, that I appreciate all the energy they put into it, is their Christmas adventure box this year. They did a great job putting together a box that families could take home and each night spend time in worship together. You know, at my house, it's a lot different because one night, we had this really nice glass candle that you lit and you talked about that. Well, the candle didn't last long. It was shattered in pieces, but overall the idea was great. But it was just a great worship time for us and our families. And I just say, if you don't have kids, if you ever see Ruth and Elisa, you ought to tell them, way to go, because they were doing things that they had never done before and kept your families connected to this family, and I think they did a great job. Yeah, they did. All right, I got to keep moving. Y'all are listening slowly. Student ministry. Brandon and his team, they were the same way. Most of their ministry is done face-to-face. Students aren't real fans of masks or socially distant anything, right? And yet, Brandon and them did a lot of amazing things. They immediately started doing their youth worship service on Wednesday nights online. They would do music and he would do a teaching time, and they had never done that before, but they picked it up and they ran with it. And it may not have been perfect, but it was something for the students. They began providing virtual small groups, and it was a difficult transition from face to face because there were a lot of student activities that they were not able to do, like summer camps and things like that, but they had activities up here at the church, and they invited certain age groups to come and participate in those and just try to create some kind of normal out of an abnormal time. They actually had a virtual contest. For those of you you're not on the internet much, there's some guys, what's the name of that? Dude Perfect. Yeah, if you've ever heard of Dude Perfect, it's where these guys do these phenomenal athletic things that they probably record 100 million times to get it perfect, and they put it out there. It's pretty fascinating. Well, our student ministry did one called Bro Almost. And basically, it was kids and parents at home videotaping failure. I mean, that's what it was. And they would send it in, they put together this video, and they would send it out to all the kids, and it was so funny and entertaining, and they just did that, something they had never done before. Of course, a big win for us as a church, particularly as a student ministry, is that during the midst of a pandemic, we actually hired Fallon Ruby to come on staff with our student ministry. If you haven't met Fallon, she's doing a phenomenal job. You ought to meet her. Sweet girl, and she's ministering to your female students and doing a great job at that. And that was a big feat to accomplish during the middle of a pandemic. Let me give you some just run of highlights. Early on, we helped facilitate a feeding with Texas Roadhouse. We served over 2,000 meals of people that came through our parking lot very early on, and Texas Roadhouse did all the food. We did an off-site baptism. If you didn't remember this, we actually went to one of our church members' backyards and in their pool, and we baptized 16 people. And the families that came and joined us for that time, and we gathered around that pool. And for me personally, that's probably going to be one of the most memorable baptism services I've ever been a part of, because it was one of the first ones we did in the midst of a pandemic. And yes, I wore a mask, and that was weird, and I'm probably going to wear one on the 21st, but we still watched people step out and just say, I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ. Don't forget, all this stuff that I'm sharing with you is because of the gospel. It's why we do it. Our angel tree ministry kept doing what they do week in and week out, month after month, big celebration after big celebration. And you as a church, you gave to make sure that ministry, Angel Tree, stayed going. Some of it was financial gifts, some of it was actually toys and things like that, but we continued to serve those families in a great way. And it's just exciting in all that. Real quick side note, because I know there's people that are watching me right now over in the other building in an overflow room. And I kind of shared this last week. This is now becoming our most full service based on social distancing. And so if you can switch to the first service, I would encourage you to do that. We don't mind using the overflow. It's not our best option, but I do want to announce today that beginning March 21st, I know that sounds like a ways away, but we got spring breaks and things coming. We're going to go back to 3 services, and the times are going to be different, so be prepared for that. For those of you who are early birds, we're going to have an 8:30 worship service, then we'll have a 10 o'clock worship service, and then we'll have an 11:30 worship service. And that's going to start on March 21st, because we don't want people, my fear, I'm just going to say this, and you folks over in the overflow, hear what I'm saying, and even those of you that are online. I don't want you to go, well, I could have stayed home today and watched this on television. Keep coming. Keep coming. We're going to make room for you. We're going to do our best to try to continue to grow even in a COVID world. Well, serve and invest. Those are 2 of our big things here at Second. And we got a lot of celebrating to do because God's done a ton of stuff. This past year, during a pandemic, we started a new Serve in Day initiative, and we started partnering with a ministry called Hearts and Hands of Baytown. It's a Christian organization that feeds people who are hungry. And they do such an amazing job. Well, we've started partnering with them, going into apartment complexes and delivering food. And as you heard Mark say just yesterday, in partnership with Hearts and Hands, we gave out over 200 families received food yesterday with our students handing it out to them, putting it in their trunks. They just drove through. And that's so cool to see. And many of you volunteered for yesterday and even going to the apartment complex, and you're going to volunteer with our kids ministry doing that in a few weeks. But also, many of you volunteered in serving your community in your own neighborhood. You took cookies to your neighbors, or you prepared meals for those who were struggling. Some people did sidewalk chalk that would just testify of God's goodness and the cross, and that was so cool to see. It was cool to see y'all be the hands and feet of Jesus over and over again, even in the midst of a time where normally that kind of stuff is more hands-on. We've still continued to do that. But also last year, that was filled with a bunch of travel restrictions and social distancing, God opened up the door for us to do missions even outside of the city of Baytown. If you remember, I shared with you a year or so ago that our desire was to plant a church. Well, little did we know we were going to enter into a pandemic, and so we have not seen that happen as of yet. We still feel like God is leading us that way, but we're not ready for that yet. But what we did do this past year is we actually partnered with a guy in Texas City who is planting a church in a brand new community being built in Texas City called Lago Mar. It's like one of these planned communities. And we said, hey, we want to come alongside you. And we took some of the budgeted money that you give, and we have given some to this new church plant so that they could get off the ground. And so our footprint, our handprint is on that new church start in Texas City. Also, there's a couple right now at this moment ministering the gospel in Slovakia to Slovakian people. And the wife of this couple actually attended second for a while. In fact, she went on a mission trip, am I right, to Haiti with us. And God began planting at that time in her heart a desire for missions. And so we helped them financially to get launched there in Slovakia. And so our handprint is on that ministry. But one that I'm really excited about is this one. This past year, in the midst of a pandemic, we were able to enter into a very strategic partnership that it would have been amazing to do in a normal year. It's phenomenal that we were able to do it in the midst of a pandemic. See, we believe that we ought to be taking the gospel not only to our community, but also to the world. And specifically, we ought to be taking the gospel to unreached people groups, people across the globe. You know, it's all of our mission to take the gospel to the nations. And we've spoke to many unreached people groups and talked about those. But this past year, we entered into a partnership through the International Mission Board, the Southern Baptist Mission Board. And we entered into a partnership with them with an unreached people group in East Asia. And so right now, what that looks like is that we are partnered with them, and they have a local leader who is actually going with his wife into the mountains to this Tibetan unreached people group. There are literally hundreds of thousands of people in this mountainside who have never heard the gospel, and they're getting the gospel for the first time. And we as a church are paying for those trips. We are supporting that local leader with gas money and food money and hotel money, or tent money, I guess is what I should say, because he's going up into the mountains. And can I just say, the reason it's so special to me is, years ago when Jeremy and Kristen lived in East Asia, we went to visit them. And one of the most amazing things we did, probably stupid but amazing, is we rented horses. And these were not like horses that you see in America, and they didn't have saddles like you see in America. And we rode these horses over the mountains into a valley. And as we entered into that valley, we were just talking, and Jeremy said, Dad, think about it. You see all these homes. There's a good chance that every one of these homes have never heard the name Jesus Christ. And I vividly remember that picture. And so when we entered into this partnership with this guy, knowing that he and his wife are really living on the edge. I mean, they're going out there doing something they shouldn't do, but they're advancing the gospel in an area that has never heard the gospel before. And the only way that they're able to do that is because of you. You give faithfully, and we use that money to send the gospel around the world. And so I say, way to go, church. And we're going to share more in closing about that at the very end. Well, final thing, and this is, I've been saving, I think all that's good, but to me, this is the best for last. 2 years ago, I don't know if you've been a part of Second that long, but 2 years ago, exactly almost to the day, it was on Super Bowl Sunday, we had just finished as a church going through Financial Peace University, where we, tried to give you tools to be able to start moving to become debt-free folks. And it was about that time that God really was speaking to our hearts, because when we moved out to this location, we took on some debt. We actually, for lack of better terms, we took on a 20-year mortgage to be able to move out here. And at that time, we were 10 years into our mortgage. So we had about 10 years left of our mortgage. And if you remember, I shared with you that we owed $2.3 million of the debt that we originally had. And the challenge was, I asked, would you be willing to give above and beyond so maybe we could eradicate that debt quicker, that we could get rid of it? And many of you accepted that challenge. Some of you took that challenge in the form of giving a one-time gift, some very large, some very small, but they started adding up. Some people started giving extra on a monthly basis, specifically to paying off the debt. And through the wisdom of our financial team, who even took some of our surplus money over the past couple of years when we weren't really earning that much in the bank, and used it to pay down the debt that wasn't large, but began paying that down. The cool news that I want to share with you today is that this week we wrote a check for $120,000 and some change, and we are now debt free. Debt free. $2.3 million in 2 years. And I say to you, church, way to go. Way to go, church. Now, Jeremy and Mark are going to come up here, because if you know anything about Dave Ramsey has a radio show. You ought to listen to it, because it'll make you feel guilty and it will excite you at the same time. But at the end of every one of his radio shows, he has people come on who do a debt-free scream. In other words, he encourages families to come on his program, and they tell their story quickly. This is how much we had. This is what we paid off. Here's how we did it. And then at the end of it, he says, okay, I'm going to count to 3, count down from 3, 3, 2, 1, and the family yells, we're debt-free. So we're going to do a debt-free scream. Yes, you are. And if you don't do it right the first time, we're going to do it over and over and over until you get it right. So whether you're excited or not, or whether you think this is hokey or not, you might as well entertain me in this moment, okay? Because I can make life miserable for you. So much for lunch plans, right? But anyway, everybody stand up. And what we're going to do, we're going to record this, and we're going to send it to Dave Ramsey and say, what do you think about this, big boy? So I'm going to count down 3, 2, 1, and then everybody, I want you to scream at the top of your lungs and clap and holler, we're debt free, okay? Everybody ready? Do it right the first time. Here we go. Ready? 3, 2, 1. We're debt free! Woo! All right. Keep... Yeah, that's good. That's good. Good. Don't sit down. Don't sit down. Tyler and the team are going to lead us in one last worship song, and then we're going to kind of wrap things up.